Right, if we are all ready to begin, our first speaker, Dr. Alwaleed, you're on. So thank you so much for joining us in almost the penultimate parallel session for this event. And like I said, I'm so sorry we were a little late. We did actually keep time for our first ever AGM, which is amazing, but we still had to get upstairs from the basement. So this is a really exciting panel, and I think there's a lot of you here. I hope you'll all enjoy it. I've been really looking forward to this panel in particular, which is around supporting the Arab world's journey to openness. And with perfect timing, I'm going to stop speaking for a minute until the call to prayer is finished. Excellent. So apologies to those of you who joined us online. We were just pausing for the call to prayer. So as I was saying, this panel is on supporting the Arab world's journey to openness. And it's a really interesting panel. I think it's a really nice way for us to start to draw to a close and to start to think about the conclusions and the next steps and takeaways for the coming year as we near the end of our second day. So it's now great pleasure for me to hand over to our co-host and my co-organizer, Dr. Alwaleed Alkhaja, who is going to give a talk on the importance of open infrastructure for open research in the Arab world and the role of the Global Sustainability Coalition for Open Science Services, also known as SCOSS. Alwaleed, over to you.
Thank you, Emily. It's, yes, I think this is the longest title of a presentation I ever had. So, I mean, just kind of a preamble to what we're talking about. We've been talking about open access publishing. We've been talking about open data. We've been talking about many different aspects of openness. And what I'll be talking about today is infrastructure. That was it. Yes. So I'll be talking about SCOSS. So today, I'm the head of open access and copyright at Qatar National Library, but my presentation today is wearing a different hat of SCOSS. So I'm also on the board of SCOSS, and I'll be talking about what SCOSS is doing and the importance of infrastructure for us in the region. So before we talk about open infrastructure, I'd like to define what open structure is. Of course, there's an Oxford dictionary definition, but in an open science context, infrastructure are the structures and facilities that refer to the scholarly communication resources and services, including software that we all depend on. And for SCOSS, open infrastructures are scholarly communications resources and services provided by, and it's very important, non-commercial organizations that enable the scientific and academic community to collect, store, organize, access, share, and access research. And open infrastructure aims to provide trustworthy assurances of openness, community, accountability, stability, transparency, and reliability. It's a lot. And if you look using this definition of what open infrastructure services are around in the world, we can see a huge interdependencies between them. They don't work in isolation, they depend on each other. One infrastructure requires the others to work. It's really an ecosystem that really depend on each other to work. Now, of course, to run any service, you require funding, you require money. These are not done, as I mentioned, from a cost perspective, these are non-commercial. So they've started basically as initiatives in universities or initiatives that are independent, but to continue doing these, and I mentioned that this is infrastructure that we rely on, and I'll give examples of some of these infrastructures. So if we look at without grants, how long can an infrastructure remain viable? It really shows that there's a need for an influx of financing or money to keep them going. Now, I don't want you to read this, but imagine a world without open infrastructure. A world that's without access to journals, to books, data sets are they're not available online. That the world that we don't have persistent identifiers or registries or standards for data exchange. These are the open infrastructures that actually we're talking about. Infrastructures are not just something that is nice to have or alternatives to commercial offerings. Commercial offerings, these are services that we depend on. So SCOS was established to kind of with trying to address the challenge that many open infrastructures were created using short-term project money, and they are no longer sustainable. So open access and open science infrastructure had grown in number of usage, but in the end, whenever there's a great project, somebody asks, where's the money? And sometimes it's difficult to continue. So what SCOS is trying to address is the huge risk that the service is stagnated, downsized, or that it's becoming non-free anymore. Maybe it's not written here, but one of the kind of obvious risks for these freely available open infrastructures are acquisition by commercial companies. So the goal of SCOS was established to sustain infrastructure, to help sustain infrastructure and implementation of open science. This was established in 2017, and it's a community-led initiative and governed with one voice. And the goal is to identify which open infrastructure require funding, which infrastructures require immediate funding that is urgent, and help them access funds and alert the community that they need to be funded. But in return, of course, we also, as a SCOS, we try to get the infrastructure to be more transparent about their costs, increase efficiency for investors in the future, and encourage good governance. So it's not a matter of only providing a one-stop funding or like a short-term funding, but it's actually to make the infrastructure much better and reliable and more useful for the community long-term. So this is something weird with the slides here, but so the governance of SCOS, there's a board which I serve on, and there's the advisory group, there's the executive group, and in the end is part of Spark Europe. And the goal of kind of the governments is to have geographic diversity and representatives from different organizations. Of course, we're primarily from universities and libraries because that's where, whenever you talk about open access, there's a saying, which I'm trying to make it a saying, is when it comes to open access, the librarian is your best friend. So when it comes to also supporting open science and open infrastructure, librarians are always there at the front line. And so on SCOS, on the SCOS board, we have different organizations from IFL, LIBER, and of course, from all over the world, in Canada and Qatar National Library. But of course, the governance of the SCOS board is also trying to grow and have more representation from different areas in the world to have better representation. So I want to talk briefly about what the SCOS strategy. So a couple of years ago with the board, we had a consultation and we came up with 3 goals. Goal number 1 is that SCOS should promote the sustainability of open science infrastructure through funding and support. Of course, money is always going to be the number 1 priority. So the first goal is to try to get the funding to the infrastructure. Just to clarify, SCOS is not collecting any money. It's just a way to encourage and raise awareness about the infrastructure, and then those who want to pay or fund the infrastructure do that directly with the infrastructure themselves. Goal number 2 is to raise global awareness about the value of non-commercial open science infrastructure, because we really take that for granted. I mean, I'll mention that later on, but one of the first infrastructure that were identified that needed money was Directory of Open Access Journals. So this is one example of an open infrastructure that we all depend on, we all know of. It's been there for more than a decade. At least in our work in QNL, we use it on a daily basis. But that's an example of an open infrastructure that was set up with not long-term funding opportunities, and it required the help of SCOS. And the last goal, or the goal number 3, is to build and maintain trust in open science infrastructure through vetting and selection. So SCOS would have a process, or does have a process, and only selects infrastructure that SCOS believes will be of value to the community on the long term. So far, SCOS has received funding from 345 different institutions from 24 different countries. And SCOS has selected or vetted 15 different infrastructures. And the total money pledged is 6 million, almost 6.5 million euros as of August 2024. Okay, so who are these infrastructure diamonds? I already mentioned Director of Open Access Journals. And so we had SCOS different cycles. The pilot cycle was the first one, and 2 infrastructures were identified to be of value to the community. Share per Romeo, which is a platform that shows all the different policies for open access, which we also use on a daily basis, especially when it comes to kind of encouraging deposits and green open access. This is your tool that you need to use, and Directory of Open Access Journals. Now, in the first cycle, DOAJ has reached its target. So each basic infrastructure in the selection, or at least in the application, they clarify how much they need and why they need it. And in this case, DOAJ reached 100%. But I just kind of word of caution, just because it's reached 100% doesn't mean it doesn't require continuous funding. Exactly, DOAJ still needs funding as out of all the open infrastructure who receive funding. And Shaper may only reach 60%. In the second cycle, 3 infrastructure were identified, so DOB and OAPN, Open Citations, and PKP. And this just shows the different numbers of how much they've reached. So it varies on, of course, as I mentioned, it requires the community to support them directly. And not all of them would reach the target, but that's what we're hoping to do over time. Third cycle. The third funding cycle, we have Archive, America, and DSpace. Now, I'm sure you've recognized many of these names, right? And we've got 2 more cycles. So the fourth cycle, Dryad, Lara Francia, and ROR. And the newly launched 5th funding cycle, we've got the Research Data Alliance and Software Heritage identified as the infrastructure that the community needs to support. Now, when cycle doesn't mean that the funding has stopped per cycle, this is kind of an open thing. So we require the community to support them. And with the newly launched 5th cycle, so far, RDA have reached 15% of its target, where Software Heritage have reached 12%. Now, this is where it comes, this is kind of where I'm asking for a call for action. And this is one of the first slides for a call of action for you as an audience. Now, as I mentioned, not all open infrastructure has reached its targets. So if you look at this plot, the target of combined infrastructure is 12 million, and the total funds pledge is almost half. So there's still a lot of work from the community to continue this. And as I mentioned in the beginning, there's a risk. If those infrastructure don't get funded, then we need to look, I mean, imagine the world without them. Imagine a world without DOAJ, Sherpa Romeo, DSpace, etc. It's not a world that we want to be part of. And we talked about open access and open science, and etc. Without these open infrastructure, we can't do all of that. We are dependent on them. And we can't risk them kind of just not being able to support themselves anymore. Now, the SCOS family as well, I want to mention, is that we see a relationship and interdependency between the SCOS family members that's been identified, as we have showed you in the beginning. And what we're trying to do is kind of more awareness about these infrastructure. So a different kind of awareness session, advocacy sessions, and trying to work with them for long-term strategy. And something that we're working on, SCOS, is to see kind of the technical connections to clarify the interdependencies between what I showed you in the beginning of a plot of all open infrastructure, but in this time, I'm more focused on the open infrastructure that is identified by SCOS together with other open infrastructures that we see. So as an example, DOAJ, you can see a connection with clocks and ISSNs and et cetera, and cross-traffic, et cetera. So there is a huge dependency. Now, it goes both ways. So open infrastructure, it's not just about funding them, but open infrastructure also have responsibility. They are accountable to their communities, and they're not accountable, and shouldn't be accountable to shareholders. That's something that we want to avoid. Some companies are making billions and billions in revenue, but they're commercial. We're talking about companies, initiatives that are small and require funding. So there's a problem with the slides. And so the open infrastructure need to also be able to be transparent in the terms of finances and governance. And this is very important because to be part of the Scots family, you need to show that transparency in what money you need, how much you need it, and what you're using it for, and what an actual plan. It's not simply just financing. And so as owners, of course, they need to promote good governance. They have open standards, and they need to raise awareness to kind of how others should fund their operations. But there's also a responsibility on us as a community. So weird, something happened, but we need to kind of support them not only with finances, but to promote open science, promote their use, and show how they're quite important. In the end, briefly, I want to show something. This is a call for action here. And this is a brilliant issue that SCOS kind of faces. If we look at which countries have supported these open initiatives or open infrastructure, I've established at the beginning that all of the world really relies on these open infrastructure, but the financing and the funding for them has been coming from Europe, North America, some in La Referencia in South America, and in Australia. But there's a huge gap. And I've talked about the gap in funding, and this is where the region here needs to take action. If we looked at the Middle East and North Africa, and I tried to kind of establish a connection, Dryad, which is an open data publishing platform community, PKP and OGS, were open infrastructure for open access publishing, and DSpace, the software choice of open digital repositories. There's a huge reliance in the region for it to use them. So thousands of dry data sets are coming from Middle East and North Africa. There are over 700 journals from this region that uses OGS. And many libraries in the region, hundreds, use DSpace. So what can we do in the region to support them, right? We use DSpace, for example, in our repositories, and we use OGS for their journals. We heard in the last 2 days about the support for more repositories, which in this case, DSpace is open source, or using OGS. But to support open science, we also need to support the open infrastructure that we're using to publish to kind of promote openness and open science. So there's a really clear call for action, is that institutions in the region need to think about which open infrastructure they rely on and think about what they need. And what we're looking for also is not financing. It could be very small, it could be very big, depending on your institution. But it's extremely important because a world without these open infrastructure is not a world that has open science or open access. With that, I ask you if you could check out the website and discuss this in your institution and ask the question, if we want open science, what are we doing for the open infrastructure? And thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Alwaleed. It's lovely to hear from you wearing your other hat. We always think of you as on the Q&L, the copyright and open access and everything. And we forget you sit on a million different boards and wear an awful lot of hats. So thank you for sharing some of that. Now, building on and sort of aligning quite well with the first paper, we are going to hear from Dr. Nafisa Abdul Karim and her paper on building open community health data infrastructure, leveraging universities for open science in the Arab world. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Before I begin, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the organizers of the forum for taking the lead to bring a much needed discussion in this region. And I also extend my gratitude to the visionary leadership of Qatar and also to our chief patron, His Excellency Dr. Hamad Al-Kuwari, for leading the way in advancing open science in the region. So we've had a lot of insightful discussions the past 2 days about open access and open research and open science. And these concepts are transformative across many fields. But given my background in public health, I want to focus on why open access is critical for the healthcare sector and public health specifically. So open access to research, health data, and evidence-based studies can lead to faster policymaking, improved health interventions, and a stronger foundation for community health improvements. So as we discuss the role of open science in this space, I'll walk through how making health data openly accessible can contribute to greater social accountability of the universities and drive impactful change at the national level. So we always begin with definitions. I'm sure all of you have heard this a lot of times before. But still, let me touch upon a few core concepts about open science. We have the UNESCO definition, and that is, it is a set of principles and practices which aim to make scientific research from all fields accessible to everyone and for the benefit of scientists and society. Now, like Walid said, there was some problem with these slides. So I'm sure all of you have seen this picture many times in the last 2 days. And Walid has already touched upon the infrastructures. I would like to talk about the open research data, the citizen and participatory science, open engagement of societal actors, and open dialogue with other knowledge systems where the local communities are involved. So let us first find why open science matters. See, open science ensures that the research outputs are accessible to everyone, and not just those who are affiliated with the academic institutions or those who can afford the subscription fees. So this democratizes the access to scientific knowledge, and it helps to bridge the gap between academia and society. It is only when this data, research, and publications are freely available that it facilitates faster collaboration and innovation. And researchers can build on each other's work more efficiently. It can avoid duplication and speeding up the process of discovery and application, particularly in the field of medicine and health. So by democratizing the access to research, it ensures that even those without the resources can benefit. So we can move into one of the core principles of open science, which is open access. And that allows research outputs, and it's not just the research papers, but other data sets, the educational resources, all of them to be freely accessible and without paywalls. And this benefits the researchers by increasing the visibility of their work. And it speeds up the dissemination, which is crucial in public health for creating evidence-based policies. So building on open access, the next important aspect of open science is open data, which allows researchers, open data, yes. So we are talking about open data that is freely used and redistributed by anyone, of course, with proper attribution. And in public health, access to such data can provide critical insights into the disease trends, and it allows for informed policy interventions. And this is essential for enhancing the community health education. I think we have covered the basics of open access and open data, and we can now explore how universities play a critical role in collecting and sharing this valuable health data. So universities, they are hubs for generating health data through the different community engagements, the student thesis, the faculty and student research. And this data holds immense potential, especially in addressing the health needs. However, the universities also have a responsibility, the social accountability, which is a part of the curriculum for almost all the universities, and to ensure that the data that they collect is used to benefit the community, which means making sure that the data collected as a part of the social accountability should be used in a socially accountable manner. Okay, so the universities, we often collect data during community engagements on non-communicable diseases, lifestyle habits, and there are other health screenings during community engagements. And much of this data, it remains siloed within the institutions, limiting its potential impact on public health systems. And by opening up the access to this data, universities can contribute to significantly shaping evidence-based policies. Now, I would like to share a case study from my university, the Gulf Medical University, highlighting how local data can inform public health interventions. So we conducted a record analysis of data from 6 different community engagement activities in Ajman, involving around 312 participants, and it was over a short period of 2 months. And this data, which was collected after obtaining the IRB approval, it provides crucial insights into public health issues within the local community. If we take a look at the key findings from this study, we can see that over half of the population had stage 1 or 2 hypertension. 5% were diagnosed with diabetes, and 14% were obese. Another 35% were classified as overweight. And the interesting fact is the majority of them were young population under 40 years of age. So these findings, they suggest the need for targeted public health interventions. And you can see this data provides a snapshot of just one region. So imagine the potential impact of aggregating data from multiple universities across the country. So the findings from GMU's community engagements, as I said, it's just a snapshot of the local public health situation in a single region. And if similar data were collected across different universities and communities, it will provide a comprehensive understanding of the public health trends at the national level. And combining these local data sets can lead to a broader national research study, which can allow us to uncover the national health trends and address the broader public health challenges, like the rising incidence of non-communicable diseases. And such aggregated data can significantly enhance evidence-based policymaking at the national level that are informed by real-world health data and tailored to the unique needs of the different communities. And to realize this vision, we need to create open community health data that can be accessed by all. So the potential of open community health data, it allows for greater collaboration among researchers, public health officials, and of course, the communities. It can provide critical insights for policy formulation, for public health interventions, and for the awareness campaigns. And publicly available health data can help to easily identify the emerging health threats. It can improve disease surveillance and support the sustainable developmental goals. So that leads us to the crux of our discussion today, which is creating open data repositories. That is a key to making this vision a reality. And for this vision to come to life, universities must play a role in creating and maintaining open data repositories. We have seen some wonderful examples from the region. Universities can contribute to open access platforms or build their own institutional repositories where the health data can be stored and accessed. And since this is health data that we are talking about, it is crucial that this data complies with ethical guidelines, because there is always a matter of ethical issues surrounding the use of health data. One such issue is the privacy concern. Health data often contains sensitive personal information, and if misused, it could violate the individual privacy rights. And data anonymization can be used to overcome this by removing the personally identifiable information before sharing or publishing the data to protect the individual privacy. Another issue would be the collecting of health data without properly informing the participants, that is the informed consent. And that is again a violation of the ethical rights. Clear consent process will ensure that participants are fully informed about how their data will be used. We can use the simplified forms, consent forms for clarity. We also need to ensure equity and fairness, which is another challenge, as open data can be used to benefit certain groups over others, which reinforce the already wide health inequities. And open health data can benefit all communities. It can benefit all the communities by encouraging diverse research and addressing the disparities in data application. Another issue is the lack of transparency about health, how this health data is shared and used, which can lead to distrust among participants. Those who are familiar with research know how much this can affect the public health. And it is important to regularly report how this data is being used, who has access to it, and the impact it has on public health, and to implement mechanisms which hold the researchers accountable. So by incorporating these ethical practices, we can ensure that the use of open health data, it remains both responsible and at the same time beneficial to the society. And I would like to show you two successful real-world applications of how health data, open health data, can drive public health policies. If we look at the University of Michigan, they have the Open Michigan platform, which is a home for all things open, including expertise and services for open educational resources, open data, and open publications. And they have a specialized platform called Precision Health, which is a suite of data sets, tools, and services which are available to researchers, which includes anonymized electronic health records, which is data for more than 5 million Michigan medicine patients. It includes the genetic data from the Michigan Genomics Initiative, the mobile health and wearable data, medical imaging, health surveys. And what happens is they combine all of these data types to inform patient care. Another inspiring example comes from Gajah Mada University in Indonesia, which is listed as an example by WHO. You can see it in the WHO website, where open data is being used for evidence-based policy making. If we take a look, this is the dashboard system Kesehatan, or the DASK repository, which is a health data repository designed to support evidence-based policymaking. And this initiative has been particularly useful in shaping maternal and child health policies and also addressing cardiovascular diseases. And they have a very interesting geospatial visualization that allows the decision makers to track the health indicators across the different regions in real time. And if we take a look at this geospatial map, we can see that in each province, the different universities in that province is responsible for generating the health data there. So it is a collaborative project and one that needs to be emulated. Over the discussions in the past 2 days, we have seen people from diverse backgrounds come and sit here and reach this kind of conclusion that we need to share data, we need to discuss, and we need to make a change. So these successful cases highlight the transformative power of open data. And we can discuss what steps the universities and the policymakers can take to leverage this potential. For the universities, it is important that they should establish clear open data policies to ensure that research data is openly accessible, at the same time following the ethical guidelines, and invest in building open data repositories to house health data collected from different social accountability activities and research activities, and also to collaborate across the institutions, to foster partnerships between the different universities to collate and share the health data. And this can lead to national level studies that provide more comprehensive insights into public health trends. We can also integrate open science into the curriculum, like the example provided by Khalifa University, where they educate the students and faculty about science, open science, and the importance of data sharing in addressing public health challenges. We can also encourage research projects that contribute to open access platforms. As for the policymakers, They should advocate for and fund open access and open data platforms, especially in the field of health, to ensure that research is available for evidence-based decision-making. And they can implement policies that can promote the ethical data handling and establish partnerships with the universities to utilize their health data for national health programs and interventions, and prioritizing the integration of this data into national public health strategies. The policymakers can also be the ones who provide incentives for universities and research institutions to contribute to open data initiatives, such as funding grants and recognition for impactful contributions. So to wrap up, I would like to summarize the key points of our discussion today. That is, open access and open data have immense transformative potential, and the universities are sitting on a wealth of untapped health data, which, if shared, could inform significant public health interventions. And by adopting the open science practices that we have been discussing over the past few days, the Arab region can unlock the full potential of its academic institutions and make meaningful contributions to public health, thereby transforming the research into policy. And that brings us to the theme, transforming knowledge into action. So thank you, everyone, for listening today. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Dr. Nafisa. It's lovely again. I think it's been a pleasingly prevalent thread throughout the course of the last, not just the 2 days, but also the first day that was online, where we are weaving healthcare into all of this, because we, as an initiative, as a stakeholder group, we have a tendency to get siloed and think about libraries and think about researchers and think about the university, and it's that practical application and that wider scope of openness. And I think that's very helpful for us to bear in mind, and also remember that we're doing all of this for a reason. You know, we want to be open for a reason, and it's a nice reminder of that. So thank you. So last but by no means least, we have our third panelist today, Dr. Batul Al-Makhouz, who unfortunately, she is on our advisory board, but unfortunately was unable to join us in person today. But she is joining us online, I hope. Yes, she is there. And she will be talking about empowering open science capacity in Arab-speaking countries, specifically talking about the Open Innovation Platform. So many thanks, Batul. I will hand over to you now.
Thank you so much, Emily and Nahil, also for the invitation. I'm really, really sad I couldn't join all of you today in Qatar. I joined in person in the last 2 conferences, but yeah, I canceled my trip for personal reason just last week in the last minute. Really still happy that this year is hosted in the Qatar National Library. I actually did visit the library just a few months ago and I had really, really good time. So I'm envious of everyone right now there. And yeah, I enjoyed really the talk by Alwaleed just before this, and also about the health infrastructure data by Nafisa. I'll try not to be redundant or repeat the same talking point because it was echoed by both of them. Also remove talking point that was delivered in my last 2 versions of this conference. And for folks who did not join the conference back in Abu Dhabi or Cairo, I've talked about our works in NASA TOPS initiative in the first conference. I also went to discuss more sort of infrastructure in the second conference. Again, I'm not going to try to focus on these or the tool that we've created in the community. I'm going to post the slide also for the last 2 conferences in the chat. Yeah. In this talk, I'm going to be focusing more about lesson learned from the community and how we can empower scientists, practitioners, researchers to adopt open science in the Arab region. Again, my slide also for this year is available online. Just added them to the chat. Yeah, I am Batul Marzouk. I do wear different hat. I work in the UK. I'm speaking right now from Liverpool. So I work at the Alan Turing Institute, which is the UK National Institution for AI and Data Science. And in that program, I manage, we explore questions around applying AI in the context of open science and health. And again, it's a bit similar to what Nafisa just discussing. So I'm going to be really, really extremely brief overview about this work. I'm not going to go into too much details. We are a convening space for over 27 universities from Oxford, from Manchester, from Birmingham, from Liverpool, and so many in the UK. And we work with NHS trusts, with charities, with city councils. And what's more really important about the work that we do, we don't just have scientists and clinicians debating and researching this question about health themselves. We work very closely with the patient, with public contributors. I think Hilal just yesterday in the opening speech did mention humanizing research, which is exactly what we're trying to do, but we also take it a bit further. So patient really part of that design making process. They set in the advisory board, they shape the research question, they make the design, they contribute to the decision making from the very beginning of the research. They're not at the very end or just recipient of that research. Again, we brought everyone in Manchester just last month in a big conference. We'll be sharing these recording materials, so contact me if you'd like to chat more about it. I'm gonna happy to share the link once we have these resources published or available. Again, you'll see patients set in this recording, these panels, contributing actively to that discussion. And just very quick to mention that this is a program do look in how we also work with patient data very specifically. So what tools we create, what's best practices when we work with health data, how we actually improve the governance around them. We work very closely with CBRD, which is primary healthcare data for over 60 million patients, and SAIL, which is the primary also care data but for the Welsh population. Again, we've created case studies, lesson learned about this experience, and happy really to elaborate more about it further outside this very short talk. My focus today is going to be around really community, grassroots, what we can learn. I will also be speaking a little bit about the Einstein Foundation Berlin Award at the very end. And if you'd like to know more about other work that we do with the International Association of Universities, which founded by the UNESCO, happy to chat more about it as well, but outside this talk. Yeah, so what you should be expecting from this talk, I've spoke too much introduction. We're going to cover mainly the experience we have in the open science community in Saudi Arabia, when open science can easily be diluted, miss the point, when it can go wrong. Then I'm going to have call for actions and invitation for feedback, for collaboration and contribution. I always start, probably people who've listened to me too much, they know that I always start to highlight why we bother actually speaking about open science in academia or tech. Again, some of the problem highlighted by previous speakers, I always mention replication crisis because we usually in denial mode. We go into science because we're very excited about finding a new result, innovation. However, the way that science actually works, you validate other people's reasons or results, and you build on the top of them. But reality, for anyone who works in academia, active research, we have what we call the replication crisis. Many of the published research cannot be replicated. And we're speaking about Q1, Q2 paper, a lot of retraction. Again, this is not just affect the science itself or the scientific community, but also reflecting the economy. Over 20 million get wasted on a study that cannot be replicated. Again, it's not just about publications, it's also about peer review, which is broken, bias, and this is a fraction of the problem we have in academia. And I don't want to spend too much time just speaking about it. Again, outside academia is no different. We all interact with tech, and I don't want to sound extreme, but tech, which also very extremely important part of everyone's life. I wouldn't be able to do this talk without tech. Is also, we know that it's monopolized or controlled by a few entities, and we have less agency over it. If you had a flight in the 19th of July this year, you would understand what I mean. Your flight and flying were likely canceled. This is because many industry that day, like airport, hospitals, which relied on Microsoft-based IT system and supported by CrowdStrike, stopped working. They become just like blue screen that day. And for context, if anyone who did not hear about that, CrowdStrike pushed a software update into Windows that day, which caused really huge IT outage that affected all the industry from airline to even hospital in a very single day. Everything stopped working. And the question I try to really reflect on, why we don't push more decentralization in tech rather than centralization with a few entities, why we can't use alternative, open and secure software. And this is, again, not to sound radical, but it's more about reflecting about our agency. And I think balance here is the important part. This is a problem, again, not very new to us. People started realizing these problems in tech and academia back in the 90s. We all know about a project like Linux. Apache started the movement and with the open source in the 90s. Again, 2002, the Budapest Open Access Initiative, which led the platform like Archive, which just Alwaleed spoke about as an open infrastructure. Again, the Creative Commons was almost the same year, was established as a legal framework. And again, these are different movements. Some of it started parallel time, similar time, but they share really the same value, like transparency, community, decentralization, sharing. And later it became to be called open science. So open science really, this is a huge umbrella. People have been spoken about it now for 3 days, so you're probably very sick of it. But it's huge umbrella about open source, open hardware, which is highlighted by Yusuf, mentioned in the panel yesterday. Fair data, we speak also about registered report and many of these practices under this umbrella. And I always like to emphasize that the word open sometimes is very misleading. Open science is not about sharing, it's about collaboration, co-creation, participatory science, about bringing the community as really the major stakeholder in the process. Again, I did my PhD and finished in 2019, and I did it in Liverpool. And in that process, I was engaged with different communities around open science. In 2020, there was pandemic, so I went back to Saudi. And during the pandemic, I did some time sort of search around landscape, policies, infrastructure around open science in the globe. And you don't need actually much time to realize there is a huge gap in the region. So leveraging this connection we have from the other grassroots, other network in Latin America, in the state in Europe, we've set up this grassroots community in Saudi Arabia. And the community main mission is really to advocate for open science in the region from grassroots perspective and support them to start their own network and being ambassadors. I don't want to spend a lot of time going over all the activities that the community has sort of accomplished. I mentioned some of them in a previous talk, but some of them, for example, we had paid internship for undergrad to work in supporting localization, multilingualism and open source. We champion our member in different activities in different spaces. We contribute to different UNESCO working group around open science, especially capacity building and incentives. We have a special focus in capacity building. Just last week, for example, we had workshop with the Sudanese community. We did workshop for different community outside Saudi and inside Saudi, like the Saudi FDA, Kaimar, the African Reproducibility Network with Lamis, who spoke very beautifully actually about capacity building in the panel yesterday. Again, what I'm very proud of is that we have sparked and encouraged a new open source sort of networks in Iraq and Egypt. I believe Dr. Salwan Abdul Latif in the conference. And I think this is extremely important because it shows how advocates in different regions can lead to movement in their own country. And I think the main value here that we really empower researchers, practitioners, to forge this global connection, to connect with the global open science community, exchange lessons, because you will see a lot of grassroots community that believe and do things according to open science, but they don't call themselves open science. They're not connected to this huger international open science sort of network. We also empower researchers by mentoring. Researchers start as a mentee, then they become mentors. Again, here, example, Abdurrahman Sawaj, who's a bioinformatician in Kaimar, co-delivered a talk in Force Backstage 2023 titled Lesson Learned for Increasing the Accessibility for Right to Left Languages, Supporting Open Source Community. And he also commented an outreach to deliver MOX platform. And I'm going to speak about the MOX platform later on. He reflected in his experience how rewarding it was, not just because he guided and support others, but he also find actually lessons, he find fulfillment in that process. Another ambassadors and mentor in the community who learned how to use R and open source from scratch. She became first open science champion from Saudi, working in one of the most wonderful R package in linguistics. And this is in her words, speaking about how she feels empowered to contribute to the existing body of reproducible science. Again, these are just two examples, but actually many members from the community contributed, delivered talk sessions, and supported workshops in different places inside Arab region and outside the region. This actually slide is not updated because I was very lazy to update it today. Another key message that I think is very, very important that community work can really empower researchers, especially young researchers, to change norms and influence their institution. Again, the learning experience when you work with community is bi-directional. We have also learned from the community themselves a lot. I don't have capacity to go over all of these lessons. I want to highlight just one of them that I think fundamental in the discussion in the conference around open science in the region. And the observation is that the challenge in applying open science here is not really about lack of alignment with its value. We all agree about this beautiful value. Actually, some of these value part of our culture. Instead, it's about lack of agency to create our own norms and our own standards. Again, researchers, academics genuinely want to change their academic practice, engage more with the community, but the system, which often try to catch up with Western research standards, hold them back. And I bring this back because it's really important to highlight that. This is because the Eurocentrism, again, is not something that only applies to traditional way of doing science or creating knowledge, but also can spill sometime over an open science movement. And many people, institutions, unintentionally try to adopt open science sometime in Eurocentric way. Again, Samir Amin has very, very beautiful quote that I invite everyone to reflect on it. The country of the periphery would not be able to catch up to the core. And this is because how the system creates inherent polarization within itself. So if you keep going that way, we wouldn't be able to catch up to that Eurocentric core. Again, I don't want to be able to be radical. This is not saying that West is always wrong. It's saying that we should have balance, we should have agency. We should take good practice, but contextualize them to the region for the benefit of the region itself. For example, open science that does not support community in a human-made disaster like what we have right now in Gaza fundamentally miss the point of open science itself. Again, if we don't do that, these are some of the observations that we've seen in the region. We love open access. It seems very fashionable, but we need these impact factors. Again, which is exactly the opposite of the root movement they're trying to achieve with open science. The same with open science itself. Some see open science in a more fashionable way, but they still value ranking in everything. We build open infrastructure, but there is no community input. There is no support for localization. There's no support for right to left language. There's no sustainability. And again, this is open science, but without the root value of open science, this might really provide some sort of short-term wins, but in the long term, we're going to end up really with the same problem that we started with. Yeah, كأنك زايد ما غزيت. So open science is really about agency. The goal of open science is not openness itself, it's about achieving that knowledge equity for diverse actors who can access, reduce, and set that direction of knowledge. Again, Zishan has such a beautiful word. He says, we tend really to focus on these visible barriers like bay walls, open spaces, but not enough really attention to that hidden, invisible epistemic barriers of the North and the South. Nahil spoke very, very beautifully about decolonization yesterday, so I'm not going to repeat what she said. Just to extend, if you look at knowledge system before colonization, you'll see knowledge system everywhere, in Latin America and Asia and Africa, everywhere. But if you look at the same map after colonization, again, this map, if you're not familiar with this map, it shows where research in journals comes from. It shows like whose knowledge really counts in. You can see in this in some country that some country actually does not exist in the map, like Arab countries, this is Africa, does not exist in the map, their research, their language, their knowledge is not a thing. This is not the case if you look at the civilization and the knowledge system history of this country before the era of Western colonization. Again, what I would like to get from this map, there is this power dynamic that decide whose knowledge really count. And this is not radical invitation. This is really reflection, invitation to reflect and the need and the balance and contextualization as we adopt open science in the region. Edward Said has, again, very beautiful quote. I love books written by Edward Said. He said, ideas cannot seriously be understood or studied without their force, or more precisely, their configuration of power also being studied. Just going back to the open science as we learn from the community, the way that the community understands open science is about really setting our norms, our standards. It's more about agency. Open science is more about decentralization. So we should not start from practice and get it duplicated. For example, this is a very simplified way of just trying to understand what agency looks like. We should not start from the practices and duplicate it, but really goes back to the value that we're trying to put in open science. It's about agency, about transparency, about equity, about freedom, about decolonization. After then, we take this value and contextualize them to the region. When we think about open science, we think about localized open source, decentralized. Actually, most of the open source today hosted in GitHub, which itself is not open source. I'm also guilty of that. I use GitHub all the time, but GitHub, again, is not open source and hosted again in Microsoft. The same when we think about fair and open data, we should thinking about the care principle, about indigenous knowledge. We should be thinking about how we contextualize all of these practices. Reflecting on that, we've been working to create this open education resources that speak more to the community. We've designed what we call the MOOCs platform. We call it open innovation. And we designed it with multilingualism in mind, making sure it works for right-to-left languages. Non-coders can actually contribute, not just like going into lessons, but also adding and contributing lessons. It's totally free of charge, and we're working to launch it just early next year. Again, we do recognize language is extremely, extremely powerful and giving people agency in their own knowledge system. And this actually platform would have never been possible without contribution from many of the community. You'll see them listed in the README file because the platform itself is open source, and mainly the contributors, Sandy, Namis, Rishi, who really contributed to this project itself. So this is actually an invitation, call of action for researchers in the audience, for librarians to contribute either by just promoting the platform for their network or even contributing lessons. We're happy to work with them directly, translate ideas. You don't have to record this lesson. You get it added to the platform and make sure that you are acknowledged by name in these contributions. Again, we wanted to be reflecting what the community needs. Another invitation, I've added it very quickly here. We invite also institutions, individuals, ECRs to nominate. I work with this. I'm part of the jury member at Einstein Foundation Berlin Award, and I'm happy to chat about it more, but I would love to see more Arab bring in their own understanding about advocacy in open science, about how we contextualize open science in these spaces, how they understand open science in their community. Again, previous winners has been at the archive who I already spoke about it and the Center for Open Science, but we're looking really for more diverse submission. We reflecting a lot about the call that we have and how to make it more sort of inclusive and reflecting agency in the submission that is submitted. So any ideas, and I would love again for people to nominate themselves as individuals or ECRs, even as institutions. The last one is unconference session. Again, when I say unconference, this means we don't do talks, we do more working, discussion, less presenting, again, with value participation that bring perspective to the room and how we understand open science, how to set the direction of knowledge, how to make that knowledge more actionable. And everyone here in the audience is very, very welcome. The takeaway message from this presentation, we should always not dilute the essence and root value of open science. It shouldn't be a buzzword or checkbooks. We're not adopting open science because it's very fashionable, but it's an opportunity to set the direction of knowledge to us, actually. And I would like to conclude with this quote and invite myself and everyone to reflect on the narrative, the priority, and the discussion of open science today. We yearn for frictionless technological solution, but actually people talking to people is still the way that norms and standards change. And thank you so much. Again, this is my email in case anyone would like to chat about anything. Thank you.
So, perfect. Thank you, Batul, as ever, a really brilliant and thought-provoking speech. So we've still got about 20 minutes. So if Nafisa and Alwaleed could come to the front, and we will have a little Q&A. And all of you, you've got about 30 seconds while our speakers are walking down the stage to formulate some questions. So do we have any questions in the audience or online yet? Oh, someone was quick off the mark there. That's what we like to see. And by the way, when you do read out the question, do say who you are and state who the question is for, please.
Hi, I do have a question to Dr. Alwaleed. First of all, my comment, it was wonderful to see how many different hats you wear. And my question is, it's probably very basic, but I'm trying to understand SEOS in a way, like you mentioned, SEOS doesn't collect any kind of funding. And there was some budget cycle or funding cycle you have been talking about. So I was wondering, like, is it for the institution which are part of it? Was that you are kind of looking at it with those funding cycle, or is it, I kind of trying to understand. Another thing is that is SEOS is primarily community of practice, or what exactly is I'm trying to understand the entire concept itself.
Sorry, what's your second question?
Is it a community of practice or something, or how exactly it's actually promoting? It's like, is it sharing ideas among the institutions which are part of it?
The second, so do you mind just repeating that? Sorry. What, it's open infrastructure community?
No, I'm wondering the SEOS as a SEOS. That's the one you were talking about, right? So I'm wondering, is it a community of practice for all those institutions, including QNL, which is part of it? Is that how it's functioned?
So thank you for the question. So to answer the first, what we're trying to do at SCOS is to continue momentum for support of open infrastructure. So ideally, of course, you can do a call and say, I need a year or 2 years and then we can get all the community to fund one. But that's not the reality of how open science and open infrastructure or what they need. There are so many different initiatives, open infrastructure initiatives that require urgent funding. So what SCOS is trying to do is on a regular basis to have these cycles. So in many cases, the cycles allow for continuous funding. So it's not like like start and stop, but just a way of SCOS trying to keep the momentum and also reflect the urgency of the situation. So every period we identify based on applications that we get, which open infrastructure requires funding, which have demonstrated good governance and transparency in what they need. So it's more of kind of continuous activity. And with SCOS, there is, as I mentioned, kind of the governance of it, but everybody's doing it on a volunteer basis as well. So it's basically representatives from different institutions around the world, and we do hope to have more from this region as well. But not necessarily as a community best practice, but actually the governing board defines a strategy or work on a strategy and put an action plan and organizing webinars, trying to get us board members to speak in conferences and promote this. It works in that function, more or less. I hope that answered the question.
Does anyone else from the audience have any questions at present? Well, that's lucky because I've actually written down loads. So Dr. Nafisa, one for you is obviously you talk about how we should be sharing responsibly and obviously we should be mining the universities for that knowledge. But what, you touched on irresponsible usage as a concern. And in healthcare, more than anywhere else, it is a very real concern. There's a lot of historical irresponsible usage of data, particularly medical data of different segments of society. So what would you think are some of the measures that one could take to move beyond just don't do it, we assume people are going to behave themselves? Doesn't always work in any sector. So what would you do to enforce that sort of rigorous moral usage, appropriate accordance to best practice?
Yeah, thank you, Emily, for the question. I think I have already touched about the ethical issues and the presentation. See, every coin has two sides. We need to share data ethically and at the same time make it responsible. So the first and foremost thing is education and awareness, that the researchers should have a basic understanding of their responsibility and how to utilize the data. We have seen, like historically, how much people lose trust in the research activities because of just some people violating the ethical guidelines. And that's why the guidelines have been made. And this is also where the policymakers come into action, that these things need to be regulated and enforced properly so that we do not cross any boundaries that will violate the basic human rights. I think that answers the question.
Thank you. We have a question from the audience, please.
Hello, I am Bujma Dundan, an academic from Algeria. I'm a linguist. My question is addressed to Dr. Al-Marzouk. What do you think of the open access place in linguistics, according to your experience? Don't you think it's easier to implement open access in linguistics than in other fields? Maybe because in linguistics, we do not develop products that we usually sell. We do not have like a commercial mindset like in other fields. Isn't it easier to implement the open access spirit in linguistics than in other fields? Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question. That's a very good question. I think, so linguism is not my sort of field, but some people in the community, they come from linguistic sort of background. And what we see with open science is the way that we adopt the science from discipline to discipline is very, very different. And there's not yet really that norms that have been sort of introduced by the community, how you sort of apply it. There's natural science, more advocacy around open science. You don't see how open science actually can be applied in some of the humanity disciplines, in arts, in philosophy, and other disciplines. Again, going back to the linguistic problem, I think there's a lot of opportunities, but again, it goes back to the community. There's a talk that we gave just, was it 2 weeks ago, about disciplines. And just really when we think about how we create knowledge, sometimes we create them not just looking, again, you see that also in funding calls and everywhere when you apply to grants and funding in academia. They ask you to be not just from as one discipline, but you come as multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary or now transdisciplinary. And again, the way that we think and how we create knowledge is not about specific discipline, but the problem that we have in science and in academia, that each discipline has their own sort of mental model about how they understand things. So when we bring people from different disciplines in one room, you would expect they would come with something very brilliant because you bring in different perspective. But a reality that's from experience, people speak the same thing, but they understand it differently. Or they speak different things, but understand it in different ways. And again, it goes back how these norms and standards that exist within discipline. I think linguistic in the way that you study it actually, and like in the Arab region, it's going to be very, very different when you also understand or apply it in different region or in the West. again, there's a lot of these intricacies that is not yet solved. And I think is a question to the community themselves, how the adoption of open science and the knowledge that they created, whether it's discipline focused or more transdisciplinary, by creating and making more cross-fertilization between disciplines. Yeah, again, because when you go back, just speaking about extending about transdisciplinarity, when you go back to earlier thinkers before the scientific revolution, most of them, they not really come from one specific disciplines. And it's not because they were like brilliant people who study different things, but they look into the problem from different perspective itself. They try to understand or solve the problem in holistic way, rather than looking into it in more disciplined way. And again, this is one of the layers that we sort of try to tackle in knowledge production and how we understand and adopt open science in general. Yeah, sorry if I don't like sort of answer your question very accurately, but this is like sort of my perspective around it.
Thank you, Batul. We have another speaker from the audience, Mira.
Thank you all. This is really brilliant. I know very little and I've learned a lot. My question is to Dr. Batul. Oh, is it not loud enough? Al-Marzouk. We talked about, you talked about the region and promoting open science. I want to talk about, this may have been answered as well before, but the concept of techno-feudalism and how that might impact like resilience of open access, especially in vulnerable regions. At the UN session for Knowledge E, they brought in from the MENA region, and one especially when they look at conflict, like Sudan, they lost all of their infrastructure. And that's something that really impacts our region. We tend to be a hotspot for conflict. And so how do we build that resilience, and how does that also play into like the dominance of, big technological companies like Microsoft, etc.?
Yeah, that's a very good question. That's actually the root thing that we try to advocate for open science. When we speak about accessibility, for example, you'll see most of the discussion when you go to conferences. I was just in Washington, D.C. last month, and I felt like they are in very parallel worlds to the one that we live in, the way that it was like an open conference, sort of open science, discussion. But when they speak, for example, about accessibility, they speak about like their principle, making that repository accessible in a way, speaking about technology. But we speak in our country about accessibility. We don't have internet connection. We have our infrastructure being bombed, actually. We speak about equity in very, very different sort of perspective. And again, it's about us trying to bring this story back to the discussion and to the spaces when we speak about open science. This is what to me is open science for us. Because as you mentioned, anyone speaking about open science in very sort of shallow way, they fundamentally miss the point. If we can't really advocate for these human disasters that made in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Sudan, with open science, and help leverage open science to actually elevate this community and support them, we actually missing the point fundamentally what we're trying to achieve with open science itself. So thank you for echoing that.
Thank you, Batul. Alwaleed would like to respond.
Just a comment. Yes, sometimes it feels that we're in a surreal kind of parallel universe. We're talking about principles and open science and open infrastructure, but we're not in a vacuum. So I'd like to thank Mira and thank Dr. Batul for mentioning Sudan, Lebanon, and Gaza and Palestine. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions here? If not, while you're formulating one, I have one while you wait. Alwaleed, obviously wearing your SCOS hat, not your everything else hat. It would be nice if people gave you money. You SCOS infrastructure. It'd be nice if everyone invested in infrastructure. It'd be nice if the universities put their hands in their pockets and said, yeah, you know what, we'll take the hit, we'll step up and fund this stuff. But history, and even in the last sort of 10 to 15 years, is littered with everyone not putting their hands in their pockets and kind of assuming that it's going to be okay because someone else will pay for it. So what do we do if, the next few funding rounds, these organizations don't get the money and people don't put their hands in their pockets, and the funding, all these big foundations that have sort of thought that open science was a hot topic and they were going to do that, and then a new shiny light comes in and everyone goes and invests in other things. What do we do? You said without directory of open access journals, without Open Alex, without all of these other Red Alec and all these other things that the foundations are the cornerstone of everything that we've discussed over the last few days, everything that we do around this. What do we do if no one gives them money?
I mean, I'm not sure what we will do because we are, I mean, it's the long answer. So we're really dependent on them. I mean, we talk about DSpace. I mean, even in Dr. Hilar's presentation yesterday, where he showed the number of repositories in the region, majority of them are DSpace. And when you look at if any DOAJ presentation of Dr. Kamal, if you ask him how many journals from the Arab world or region are in DOAJ, majority of them would also be in OGS. So the thing is, I mean, we have to do something. It is the alternative. Not doing something isn't a viable option. And on that kind of sentiment, one is cost is not directly taking any money, right? So it goes directly to the institution or the infrastructure. And the amount that is needed, I mean, we're not talking about hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands. We're even talking about hundreds of euros. Whatever your institution can provide, even if it's like 500 euro a year, provide that. 500 euro we spend on many things. I mean, one APC right now is $3,000 on average, right? So,
I think it's
or larger,
spring
especially if you're
every-
like, if you're nature. I don't think we have spring and nature in this conference, but yeah, it's a lot. So a 500 euro could go a long way. If one institution pays 500, another 1,000, another 500, altogether, we can come up with something. Now, in SCOS, we're also trying to figure out what would be the benefit to those paying. One of the issues in this region, and I can speak on Qatar, is the procurement. We can't just give money without something in return. So many of the infrastructure have been asked to come up with a kind of a membership or a benefit kind of plan. If somebody pays 500, what can they get in return? If somebody pays 1,000, what can they get in return? I think that kind of system would allow open infrastructure to flourish. But as I said, we can't think of what if we don't, because that's not something we should be thinking about.
Thank you. That's a sort of semi-positive note. Does anyone else have anything to add? If not, I would like to once again thank our panelists here in the room and Batul online. Thank you again for joining us. And thank you everyone for attending this session. We have a half-hour coffee break, which will be upstairs. Then we have the final session of the day, yes, which is the libraries panel, which will be back here in this room. Also, for those of you who are delegates, or even if you're based in Qatar and want to carry on the discussions later, we will be rendezvousing in the Old Town around 8 o'clock. So do come and join us if you can. It's not a formal tour, not planned anything. It's more of just a leisurely stroll around and a sort of casual chat and maybe some snacks if we find a nice restaurant. So come and find any one of the team in the blue lanyards if you want to join, and we can sort of make plans that way. And otherwise, thank you once again.